Good afternoon, Chaos. This is Kelatos, your friendly Legion's leader, here to do another roster review. This one for one of the gentlemen in Legacy of Chaos known as Rick 1. As you can see, Rick 1 has a fairly high galactic power rating, but Rick 1 has asked that I look over kind of his teams for the Sith Triumvirate raid and kind of see what he has that can be put together to good use. Now, I'm going to be honest, I used the info channel in Slack to find a lot of these teams. Some of them are teams that I use myself. Some of them are other teams I've heard about and are trying to try, or just generally think could be effective. Now, the majority of these teams are very tried and true, or as tried and true as you can get right now with the Sith raid, but fairly certain that they will all work very well in the phase that I suggest. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in, and you'll see there's a very good reason that Rick 1 is at a 3.4 galactic power. He has some very, very strong teams and lots of Gear 12 characters, which makes putting strong teams together fairly easy. So, the first group is kind of the end-all be-all as far as everybody's concerned for the Sith raid, and that is a Jedi Training Rey group. Now, this group is made up of Rey Jedi Training, R2-D2, BB-8, Scavenger Rey, and Resistance Trooper. We use these 5 because you do not have a Visas Mar or a Hermit Yoda ready to go yet. So if you do get those, they will probably replace R2-D2. But until that point, those are the 5 you would use. Now you have Jedi Training Rey all Zetaed out, which is awesome. I'm not entirely sure the best mods for her, but I believe you're going to want a lot of damage and crit chance. So this triangle, maybe you want to find one that is crit chance or crit damage. This cross offense is nice, and for the circle protection, yeah. I wouldn't really use a potency set because really, as far as the Sith raid is concerned, potency is practically useless, especially with Rey Jedi Training, whose lead is for a unresistible expose. So that's kind of where you're going to want to be at. So I'd get rid of the potency if you can and bring in more crit chance mods, maybe to give her some more damage. With Rey Jedi Training, you're going to have R2-D2, which I do see you have both of his Zetas, which is awesome. A lot of crit chance mods, but given his number crunch, you have a couple of options. And I would say I would give him offense or max health, because he's going to give 10% of his offense and 10% of his health to all of his allies. So maybe an offense set and a crit chance set, or something along those lines. I mean, I understand the crit chance will work well with BB-8 and giving him a quicker Illuminated Destiny, but you're going to want to get him to help with more than just that crit chance, I would think. I could be wrong. I don't use this group, so I'm not 100% certain how it works, but that's just my initial impressions. And I see that BB-8, you have Roll with the Punches. That is nice. And I also get the feeling that instead of defense mods, you're going to want to get as much speed as possible on BB-8. Because he does have a very, very low, a fairly low armor rating, your defense mods are not going to do a lot of benefit for him. So I would give straight offense, maybe 4 offense and 2 health, just to give him that for speed and 2 health, to make sure he's going as fast as possible to get his Illuminated Destiny. Scavenger Rey, I wouldn't go tenacity. I would go offense or crit chance to crit damage. just because her flurry of blows is going to be doing hopefully a ton of damage. So you want to get her crit chance and crit damage up to let her hit as hard as possible, because you're going to want to get that from her pretty often. And she does not need the Zeta, no reason to put it on her for this raid. So keep her, like I said, just mix up her mods a little bit. And Resistance Trooper. I like the 4 offense and 2 health. That's probably where I would go with Resistance Trooper. And you got maxed abilities. So yeah, there you go. As far as strategy, I couldn't really help out here, but I'm sure there are plenty in Legacy or plenty of other videos. I might try and find one and link it here in the video for you, but I'm not quite sure how to use these guys strategy-wise. As an option down the line, I have heard that Holdo is not too bad in this group instead of BB-8, but I'll have to do some more research and get back to you on that one, because I've heard she's decent, but I don't know how she works in that group, so I'm not going to recommend it right now. Just know that that is an option possibly in the future. Now, after the Resistance, another possible Phase 1 or possibly Phase 4 during Nihilist group is a Sith group under your very own Darth Nihilist lead. And I like the group that you have here. I like your Sith. I mean, I'm personally a big fan of Sith myself. But I would use Darth Nihilus, Darth Maul, Count Dooku, Savage Opress, and Sith Assassin. Now, your Sith Assassin will probably be okay at Gear 9 for right now, because in this group, her role in there is to make her as fast as possible and use her Dark Shroud to boost everybody's damage, or boost everybody's speed. So she'll probably be okay at Gear 9 for right now, though you'll want to get as much damage out of her and get her up to Gear 10 when you can. I would probably recommend that once Darth Sion is 7-star, switch him in for Savage and run Darth Nihilus, Darth Maul, Darth Sion, Sith Assassin, and Count Dooku. Those 5 would probably be a very strong Phase 1 or Nihilist part of Phase 4. So use them and get Unbreakable Will on anybody but Nihilus, and I think you'll get a lot of mileage out of that group. They're very, very sturdy, and under a Darth Nihilus lead, they survive very well, especially if you give Darth Nihilus's leader ability a Zeta. And you'll find if you have any attackers, pretty much when they do damage, they will fill their health up to full, which is great recovery after Unbreakable Will. So I think these guys are very, very strong contenders for Phase 1. So yeah, you might want to give it a try next time you run a Heroic Sith. Now, with that said, there are some good Sith for Phase 2. Now, I know there's a template featuring an Emperor Palpatine lead. I think a Darth Vader lead would be better than the Emperor Palpatine lead. And here's why. One, the Emperor Palpatine lead gives no damage bonuses, only potency and health. So the potency is practically wasted because of the super high potency of this raid, and the max health is only so-so. Now, you would be gaining Sith. They would get health when they inflict a debuff, but since they're not inflicting many debuffs, they're not going to get that health bonus very often. The same goes with the turn meter gain for Emperor Palpatine. So it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. I'm not a big fan, especially given the way that this other group I have set up could work. Now, this other group is under a Darth Vader lead with the Inspiring Through Fear Zeta. And this one gives all Sith a plus 30% offense, which is nice. And he gives them a 50% chance to remove 20% turn meter whenever they damage an enemy. Now, that's important because I think that'll slow Darth Sion more than your team would get sped up under a Emperor Palpatine lead. Now, this secondary effect could come into play in a Heroic Sith, and I'll explain why. I'll explain why very quickly, but if you want a more in-detail description, check out my other video on the strategy for using this team. But with Darth Vader, I would recommend using Emperor Palpatine, Darth Sidious, Sith Trooper, and if you have him Wampa, otherwise Sith Marauder once you get the Marauder up to 7-star. Because if you have the Zeta on Darth Sidious, he gets a plus 60% potency, which would put yours at over 115%. Okay, 115% potency. So he actually gets a fair amount of potency in this raid, especially with his Zeta, and if you manage to find a potency cross here. Now, this group is dependent upon Darth Sidious, if possible, going first, if not second, and Darth Vader there. Now, Darth Vader and Darth Sidious, if they're the first ones to hit Sion, use their AoEs to get out as many dots as possible, and as the dots stack, your Sith Marauder will hit harder and harder. So feel free to check out my strategy video on that group to see how it works if you're interested. I think it's a great Phase 2 team. Sinisteroid and Society kind of turned me on to this team by showing me a screenshot of how they work, so I just did a little bit of research on my own, checked it out. If you don't want to use Sith Trooper, however, Shore Trooper from your Empire team might be able to work as well. Next up, we have Phoenix. Now, you obviously have Zeb, Gear 12, and Chopper, Gear 10, so Zeb is the hands-down option for you specifically. Armands has been trying to convince others that Chopper is better. Now, I've not run them, so I couldn't tell you from experience which I think works better. But you are welcome to gear up your Chopper and give it a try. Let us know what you think. But I will say, for this group to work to its maximum, you really need to have a Zeta on Sabine and a Zeta on Kanan Jarrus. So they're really going to want those for this group to work as well as it possibly can. I know the last one was quick, but there are really two possible Empire teams you can run here, and I'd be curious to know which you like more. The first one is what Arnold T101 calls the Gar Saxonator. This is a full Empire group made of Gar Saxon, Stormtrooper, Grand Admiral Thrawn, Death Trooper, and for you, I would say Grand Moff Tarkin. And Gar Saxon has to be the leader of this group because his leader ability gives Empire allies 50% counter chance. Now, why is that important? Because you have to run Stormtrooper in this group, and you'll notice that Stormtrooper, once you get his Omega, if his basic ability does not crit, he lands an irresistible expose. So, Stormtrooper, who would be taunting most of the time, whenever he gets hit, he has a 50% chance to counterattack. If he counters and hits Sion, and his attack does not crit, you're landing an expose. So when that expose lands, your next attack is doing damage equal to 0.002% of Sion's health. Very similar to the way that Jedi Training Rey lands her irresistible exposes. So that is an option there. You would want your Stormtrooper to survive as much as possible and not have crit chance. So really you want to get his crit chance as low as possible for this particular group. Gar Saxon's leader ability does have a Zeta, but it is not necessary, though obviously it will help. The other thing that would make this group work is your Death Trooper's Death Mark, of course, and Grand Admiral Thrawn's Fracture. If you can Fracture and Death Mark Darth Sion at the same time, and do it right before he AoEs, you could, in theory, get all 5 of your Imperial characters to counter him while he's death marked. And on top of that, Gar Saxon's unique gives him a 75% chance to assist when allies attack. Yes, that means if every single one of his allies counters on the same turn, he could attack up to 4 extra times. I have seen it myself. When Sion uses his AoE, he gets hit 9 times. Not all the time, but it's possible. Now imagine being hit 9 times while he's death marked, and one of those times even adds an expose. So you're talking insane amounts of possible damage against Darth Sion, which is why I really am going to like this group, and I think I'll run it instead of the Chex Mix or Imperial Troopers, but we'll see. With that said, you could still run your Imperial Troopers with General Veers, Colonel Stark, Shore Trooper, Snow Trooper, and Magma Trooper. Those 5 would work fairly well in the Sith Raid, and they'll do a good job. To use that group, however, you really need to have a Zeta on General Veers, and the Zeta on Colonel Stark would be recommended, but not necessarily required. Now, the fourth possible group I give you in Phase 2 is going to be composed of mostly Rebels. Now, this group is similar to one of the big solo groups for Heroic AAT. And for this group, you're going to run an Admiral Ackbar lead, primarily for his coordination, so that whenever somebody uses an ability that's not an attack, they call a Rebel ally, because he's going to be paired up with Princess Leia. Now, Princess Leia being a Rebel, you are going to hope that she gets called as often as possible, though she does need a couple Omegas to make her as good as she can be. Her Zeta, not a super big deal, but you could use it for sure. This group with Admiral Ackbar and Princess Leia, you want to put some non-rebels in it to make sure that Princess Leia has a better chance of getting called. So this group would use 2 separate Jedi, Barriss Offee, who you have, and once you get him to gear 7-star, General Kenobi. Now, General Kenobi is a strong tank for this group, so you definitely want to use him because he'll call those assists using Princess Leia, so you want to get him in here. Now, the 5th character is recommended to be a tank, and you really have 2 options for that tank. Well, you only have one, unless you want to gear up Sun Fac. Sun Fac is an extremely underrated tank nowadays, but he used to be a very strong tank, and he still is strong. There are just stronger tanks. But he's one possibility and would be my first pick. However, if you don't want to gear him, you can use Stormtrooper Han in this group to help feed turn meter. You could use Obi-Wan Kenobi as a tank, though I think Stormtrooper Han and Sun Fac both would be significantly better. And so those are 4 possible Phase 2 teams you could use. Once you hit 2% overall in the raid, hold the other 2 groups for Phase 4 and use them against Darth Sion in Phase 4. Phase 3, if you don't use the Death Trooper Gar Saxon team, you could use Death Trooper in Phase 3 with Commander Luke Skywalker and a Chex Mix team. Now this team includes Commander Luke Skywalker, Chirrut Imwe, Death Trooper, Han Solo, and Pow. Now I see that your Pow is not very high gear, which I wouldn't feel bad, most people don't, but he's in there to give offense up using one of his specials here to make sure that whenever your guys are hitting Traya while she's toppled, it does massive damage. Now, I have also seen that once she is ready to go, Rebel Officer Leia Organa is better in this group than Raid Han, strictly because of her Rebel Barrage. Her Rebel Barrage can strike up to 8 times. Now, if you are hitting Traya while she's toppled, there's no other targets for her to hit, so all 8 of those barrages will hit Traya and trigger Deathmark. So you can see that that's definitely a strong possibility and might be better use of your Death Trooper than Gar Saxon, since you have some really strong Phase 2 teams. Now, that's a great start for that group, and really that's a good way to get your work in on Phase 3. That's really the only group, unless you want to use, like I said, Imperial Troopers with Death Trooper. It's just, here you have a few options, because you could hit some massive numbers in this phase. Now, Phase 4 for you, you have 2 really strong teams here. The first team is going to be a Night Sister group under an Asajj Ventress lead, who to make the most use of them, you really would need both Zetas on Asajj, but 2 Zetas on her, Mother Talzin, Old Daka, Night Sister Acolyte, and Night Sister Zombie. Those 5 together can get ridiculous amounts of damage onto Darth Nihilus in Phase 4. Okay, some of their mechanics really kind of cheese the bonds of weakness, but it's super effective, and if you have the people to do it, why not? Now, after Darth Nihilus is dead, you could switch out your Night Sisters and use a First Order group that you have here. Now, the First Order group would consist of Kylo Ren Unmasked, First Order Executioner, First Order Special Forces TIE Fighter Pilot, First Order Officer, and First Order Stormtrooper. Ideally, this group would have 3 or 4 Zetas, Kylo Ren Unmasked's lead, First Order Stormtrooper Return Fire, and a Kylo Ren Unmasked's Scarred ability. Because the First Order TIE Pilot, I do not believe has a Zeta, First Order Executioner does not have a Zeta, and First Order Officer does not have a Zeta. So really this one only needs 3. So hopefully that gives you some places to work on. And really that's 8 solid groups that you could use. Granted, 2 of them use Death Trooper. So you'll have to pick which one you use. But those are the teams I would focus on. And like I said, I would gear up maybe your Sith Trooper, your Sith Assassin, possibly Holdo, Gar Saxon, and Stormtrooper. Those are the guys that I would put next on your list to kind of make them more useful and get a group of them together. So hopefully this, like I said, gives you some great ideas, and you could really start hitting the Sith raid at your peak potential Rick 1. I'm sure you could do a crazy amount of damage with the roster you've got. The only downside is you need a lot of Zetas. And that's just the reality of the Sith Triumvirate raid. So good luck on farming those Zetas, and when you get them, I'm sure you will be able to do ridiculous amounts of damage in the raid. So that's it for right now, Rick 1. This will be Hekelitos saying good night and good luck to you.